New Pope, who dis? Welcome to the officially unofficial podcast for HBO's New Pope on the Bald Move Network. I'm your host, A.Ron.
And I'm Cecily.
And we are here to talk about episode 7 of the New Pope, when worlds collide. We got the new Pope. We got the young Pope. We got popes on popes.
We've got the Antichrist.
we have types, anti-types, and we are here for it. We got our old intro music back, better and sexier than ever. This was a real roller coaster of an episode. We were vibrating visibly with excitement when we got the intro, and the lights all came on, and he opens his eyes and smiles, and we get this intro, and like, oh my god, this is going to be so much fun. And then things get really deep and weird and moving in the way that like religion at its best can do. If you listen to a lot of my different podcasts, I'm not really a religious person. I'm an atheist myself, but if I had a religion, it'd be something like the leftovers. It'd be something like the young Pope. It'd be something like the new Pope. Let the mystery be. Mm-hmm. What'd you think of the episode?
I like this episode. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that I took the most notes on this episode where we have the least amount of moving around going on, but the most is happening.
Yes.
I did notice, I thought from the beginning of the episode or the beginning of the season, I strongly believed that Lenny was going to wake up, and it's absolutely true, and it's happening for real. And I thought that John Paul III and Lenny, the Pius XIII, would just be at odds on a lot of their thinking. But it seems that they're not really at odds. We saw that with John Paul III. Lenny occurred to him and hid his heroin box when he was going to go to sleep one night.
Yeah.
And it seems like they kind of are working together, but not quite in the ways that they would expect.
See, I thought that from the beginning that it looked like that they were showing that Pius XIII and John Paul III were going to work together, but the tragedy was going to be because of the fact that you can't have two popes, and you've got this history of popes and anti-popes and Christ and antichrist, that the tragedy is going to be that they're not going to be able to work together. We're not going to get what we want as an audience, is what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very much like Lenny is not in the mood to fight JP3 for the papacy. He says that I hope they have a bed for me at least there still.
Yeah.
Because, where do you go from here after 12 months in a coma? He's missed out on a lot.
Yeah.
What I did notice says that there are times like Lenny is watching the terror attack unfold. So I feel like that makes him even more driven and invested. And he's, when it comes to Eric, he's praying for him to be made a man. But you contrast that against John Paul III, who is confessing to some of his sins, who is saying he's not a man of steel, becoming a man of steel by admitting weakness, I feel like, while Eric is being taken away. Just like in the last episode when Pius XIII moves his finger and the woman who Esther choked to death gets back up, I feel like him praying for this man to be made a man and then showing John Paul III finding some sort of resolve through what's happened. I feel like if God works in mysterious ways, then he's answering Lenny's prayer in a way that Lenny didn't anticipate. Because Lenny doesn't perform miracles.
Sure.
Lenny creates miracles, but they're not performative.
He just intercedes. I think it's interesting because like you at my notes, I usually have 2 to 3 pages of my outline. It's I just scrolled through. It's 6 pages. There's a lot of digression into like Moses mythology and more. Because I think that's really key to understanding what's going on here. That you've got. And I think what you're saying is right, that you've got the tale of these two men, and there's so many parallels to it. Like Eric, is kind of like the Madonna. I'm going to call it's the doctrine of Madonna throughout this discussion. You've got the Doctor and Madonna that are in this dead house, very similar to Sir John's parents. They're mourning the fact that their son never lived, whereas the Sir John's parents are mourning the fact of the life that their son didn't get to have as well. But they haven't given up, and it's their moment of, I think, tragedy here when their son dies. Although that's a whole complicated thing too. Seems like it's a turning point and a time for them to stop mourning and start living again, whereas the moment of their son's death is where the Brannixes stopped living. There's a lot of symbolism that's tied into this, so you might be right that the wires in heaven got crossed, and they're going to make John Paul III. God's going to make John Paul III a man. That's stands in contrast to like what Voello says, that you can't make the weak strong. You can tear down the strong, but you can't make a weak person strong.
Yeah.
But we also see many, many things that you could easily describe as miracles happening in this series. So maybe that'll be another one.
Also had a man killed, so
yeah,
can't take him as the ultimate authority.
Well,
but also, I wanted to mention that Lenny is telling the parents, the Doctor and the Madonna, to follow the love, which is JP3's thing. He's telling the parents, I think he's preparing the parents to discover each other and to love each other again before their son dies, because if there's this much grief and distress in the relationship and then their son dies, then that'll only fracture them further.
Yeah. Well, plus what Voello says here about you can't make the weak strong, that's what God does. Like if you're talking about Moses, when Moses was there and God appeared to him in the burning bush, Moses just had a flow of excuses like, I'm tongue-tied, I stutter, I'm not a strong man, I'm a weak man. And God's like, that's the whole point. I don't want people to think that you're doing this. I want them to know that I'm doing this. Like the nation of Israel itself, God's chosen people, was not chosen because they're numerous and they were a mighty people. They're chosen because of their special relationship of God, and so he can exercise his power through there, and people don't think that, oh well, this mighty military power is it's all credit to God. So and also, if I'm kind of putting some things together, what God gave to Moses as a kind of a nod to his weakness is he gave him a strong supporter in the form of his brother Aaron, who's like, it's like God's like, I know your brother can talk, and I know your brother's not shy, so you take him up to Egypt and do this together. And so if you're holding out hope that this Pope anti-Pope stuff is going to wash over, maybe Lenny can be the person that puts his uses his power that he has over the people, uses his personal charisma and his strength, because he's bulletproof. Lenny just doesn't give a fuck, because Lenny has God on his side. Like maybe that's a way that they're going to heal all the different fractures we see happening in the religion. And there's a lot, like not just a metaphorical fracturing over the child abuse scandals and how does the Catholic Church evolve in an increasingly secular world, but like you see the statue of the Pieta literally fracturing and crumbling. Like there's a physical attack against the church too with this current of terrorism that they're undergoing. So it's all really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shall we get right into it?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the intro first. Lenny comes out of the ocean, just like a little tiny bronzed speck with a scrap of white fabric across his crotch. Comes out of the ocean, and Esther, looking hot as ever in a bikini. She's wearing this enormous crucifix that is his personal cigarette holder.
Uh-huh.
And he goes, man, Lenny's got this power move where he occupies a woman's personal space in a very intimate and erotic way, and then kisses them on the forehead.
Right, like while maintaining eye contact. He's not looking at her breast while he reaches for it. So it's not a sexual thing. It's like, it's very powerful, as you said.
Yeah, and then he walks away like cool guys don't look at explosions. Like cool guys don't look at explosions because he's just
a lot of them.
Like, yeah, no, you can see as he's walking through, and you see like the effect he has on this dream or like heavenly version of Sophia, and like all the different nuns are depicted here in the beach, and a lot of people that I don't recognize, but you can just see. And as we were watching this for the second time, I was like, whose gaze is most being catered to? And I'm saying GAZE, but the GAYS are having a field day with this one too, because like Jude Law is so beautiful and so perfect, and the camera is on him, and you can see like from this profile, like you can see his amazing butt switching from side to side. When you go from the front, you can literally see his package bouncing off his thighs from one direction to another.
So it seems like your gaze is being catered to specifically.
I mean, I'm not immune to the man's charms for sure.
No.
And
there's just this power and confidence that just
is it a quantity over quality? It's like you've got the main thing being focused on, which is the perfection of Jude Law in middle-aged, bronzed, and perfectly coiffed, and with this tighty whitey that's glowing. It's glowing.
I like to think that this is his maybe dream sequence that led up to the moment that he wakes up. This is what he was imagining. But it's also such an interesting concept that this sexuality is very closely connected to your spirituality.
Yeah.
Like the nun who masturbated next to him,
Mm-hmm.
like she absolutely was never going to touch him, never molest him in any way. But her faith was so close to this horniness that all of these nuns have. And Sophia and Esther, it's devotion is devotion.
Yeah, and I think that you think about what Lenny said about heaven and how it's essentially just like earth, except for you glimpse the glory of God.
Oh, I glimpsed it.
I thought it's interesting that he wakes, like if you think that this vision's running through his head and he wakes with this satisfied smile, and I can compare that and contrast to like Gutierrez, who's in anguish. It's like, God satisfies my spirit, and this man satisfies my body. Why do I feel empty? To Lenny, who feels completely comfortable in control, although he's having his issues with God too. Is it just that like Lenny's secret is that he has this effect on people, but he never indulges in it, so it's just like completely satisfying to him? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like Lenny is aware of his imperfections. Like he's obviously performing miracles, but he only believes himself to be in the center of coincidences. Just like JP3, he doesn't believe that God likes him.
Yeah.
But he is a servant of God, so I feel like it's tied up in that somehow.
Well, there's also something Christ-like in that if you go through the Bible's descriptions, because a lot of times in Jesus, especially in like Renaissance and Middle Earth, he's always depicted as this sickly, pale, frail man in anguish on the cross. But the Bible describes him as like he's essentially the masculine ideal. He's a perfect man. He's very beautiful. He wears not extravagant clothes, but like very well fit, well made clothing. Women are constantly throwing themselves, weeping at his feet, anointing his feet, massaging his feet with oil, and then drying them and
washing them with their own hair,
washing them with their tears and drying them with their hair. And like it's easy to see this kind of like, but yet Jesus is completely incorruptible and immune to it all, and that kind of power and that charisma. And every once in a while you'll see like a hot Jesus depicted in art, but I wonder if they're playing with that too, that the apparent perfection of Pope Pius XIII, yet he's completely he knows the power that he has, but he doesn't ever use it in a base or human way. I don't know. It's a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to go away from Lenny because else the whole podcast would be about him. I want to talk about the stuff that's going on in the Vatican, because there's a lot of stuff here. We see the refugee boy who has a relationship with the nun, and they're expecting a child. Voello had, satisfied all of their concerns last episode, and here comes Ascente ready to turn over the apple cart.
Was it Ascente or Cavallo?
No, I think Cavallo is the one who says... he's the one who confronts Ascente and said, hey, Voello was going to overlook all this. And Ascente is like, yeah, well, he was, and I'm not going to. And I've said many times that Cavallo is the worst. But I do like how he completely dominates Ascente here, because Ascente's being a little shit. And sometimes you need a real asshole to take care of a shit. It's like the Team America World Police kind of.
Oh, I felt the opposite. I feel like Cavallo is the one that's telling Voello secrets, as a way to keep his power now that Voyello's gone. And
Oh, yeah.
he's also intimidating Ascente, who is also a man of porcelain in this moment. And I hate Cavallo.
Oh, I hate him too, but I think that Ascente is the one that's behind it. I mean, he's the one who's got the smug pious look on his face while it's happening, and Cavallo is confronting him. But we'll see. Um, then we see Faisal. He's no longer has a secure situation. He goes to beg food from a deli guy who looks like he might be sympathetic. And the guy's like, "What? I mean, it's Ramadan. You can't be eating during daylight hours." And he said, "You know what? Come back later." We also see a scene of John Paul III's dog running towards the famous statue of Michelangelo's Pieta. This is a depiction of Mother Mary cradling her dead son Jesus in her arms, and it as Sorrentino has done. It's a very sanitized depiction of something ultra violent, like when we saw the corpses on the side of the river and they were immaculate. Now, like the way he depicts this explosion is just everything dissolves into just blinding white light. We hear that this attack on the basilica happened. There's no casualties. It's a dynamite attack. There's no injuries, but there's serious damage to the basilica itself. And that
There's just one four-legged casualty.
yeah, there is true. There's no human casualties,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, there's some doggo casualties. And they found two young men, an Egyptian and a Syrian, taken near the site. And we see this intercut with a picture of Faisal being locked in a cell. And they say that there's been total silence from the Holy See, which is people are commenting on. Do you think that Faisal had anything to do with the dynamiting?
I really don't, because the way that he was kicked out was so nonviolent. He wasn't even arrested. He was just forcibly removed, and
He was kind of violent. They didn't ask him, and they said, "Please," and they were throwing him out.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they removed him from the property, and he wasn't arrested for that, and it just seems like a bad place at the wrong time, because he wouldn't have any reason to. I don't think he has any reason to bomb the basilica when he believes that the mother of his child and his child are inside. So if she could be in the area, and if it's even a risk, then you wouldn't do it. I don't think he was angry enough to have done that.
I think that, and the fact that maybe he has respect for the mother's religion.
But also, we clearly see that these two met by happenstance. So it would be a huge risk for this deli cashier or owner to just meet this stranger and put him up to this in one day.
Well, people, I mean, yeah, but this
you
is the shit
you
that
believe that he?
No,
Okay.
I'm saying there's multiple possibilities for his quote unquote involvement. There is the fact that he was just around the area, getting the food in the back alley like this guy was telling him to. It could be that he was used as a patsy to where, like, hey, I'm going to give you all this food. Hey, could you take this duffel bag and drop it off at this building and don't ask too many questions about it? All the way to, like, yeah, man, these Christians are terrible. They treat us terrible. They're in our holy lands invading us. They're crusading. Have you seen all the stuff that our leader's been saying? Like, I don't think that's it, but like there are a wide spectrum of him being involved to being completely innocent and a bystander to being complicit unknowingly to so I just don't know.
Yeah, it just felt like a meditation on refugees.
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about that in the very beginning, like, oh, what is he going to say about refugees? And mostly it's been positive so far, but like, I don't know exactly where he's going, but I just want to keep all those things in mind because I don't know where his story goes. Like, one thing would be, I remember John Paul II made huge international news. He famously was attempted assassination against him, shot, almost killed him, and he forgave in person the person that tried to kill him. I wonder if they're going to set up something to where, John Paul III, because it does seem like they're playing with John Paul III means something. It means something in relation to John Paul II. I'm going to make an argument for why Pius XIII means something in relation to Pius XII. It will be interesting to see if, like, they shore up his weaknesses enough that he uniquely can be the person to kind of forgive these acts. And it would be, I don't know, is it more or less poignant if Faisal's innocent? He's being forgiven for something he didn't do?
Yeah, if If that's what happens.
So, unfortunately, JP3 did find his dog had been died in the bombing, and this completely destroys him. What little strength he had. Sophia then visits Voyello in his garden where he's gardening with Girolamo and Don Mimo, and he says that he's cloistered himself. He just weeps day and night over his dog, and she wants his advice. I love this scene, like him talking about being, she's like, "You're the most intelligent man in the Vatican," which does that connect to the scary guy with the eye patch saying he's the second most intelligent man in the world?
I didn't pick up on that.
I wasn't too, but I was looking at my notes. I'm like, ooh, it's interesting that a character asserts being the second most intelligent man, and then the next week the script asserts that this is the most intelligent man.
Well, that guy said I'm the second most intelligent man in the world.
And Sophia qualified with the Vatican.
Yeah.
But I continue to, although I did look, because I'm thinking like, okay, who is this kid that's playing Girolamo? I talked about last week kind of sort of being bothered by the fact that they're using some of these people as props. And you can't find this actor, if he is indeed an actor, anywhere. Like, I searched, there's only 3 pages of Google results in the whole world. If you search for Girolamo, and I know I don't pronounce it well, but I did check the spelling, and New Pope, Young Pope, he's not credited on IMDb. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I feel the same way about Eric in this episode.
I don't think Eric's a real person. I think he literally is a prop. Like it's a fake. It's not a real person. I think it's a dummy.
Okay. We just don't have any way to know that.
I mean that's true, because like, okay, if he wasn't, then how? It's odd. I don't know how I feel about that. Anyway, Voyello explains that the Pope is poorly advised and that he's a fragile piece of porcelain. And as we mentioned in the intro, you can weaken the strong, but you can't give strength to the fragile. His advice is to ride John Paul III's weakness. And Sophia, of course, asks, "What do you mean?" We won't find out this week.
We won't know.
Do you have any idea what that means?
Ride his weakness. I really don't know.
I'm trying to think of how that would connect with my idea that he might forgive the bombers, or he might forgive the terrorists. But I don't see how you do that. But I don't know. Voyello has an idea. We'll see how that goes. We also have a flashback to Sir John not partaking in his brother's funeral. Seems like he's apart from the family as they're laying him to rest in the family's estate.
Or maybe like the divisiveness of his parents started there.
Well, also like it seems like from the beginning he was blamed for not doing enough to prevent this death.
Right.
And we're going to find this later out explicitly, but there's also some interesting things. Like, it looks like he has this amazing array of beer cans and some of them are open, and some
seemed like they were all closed cans to me, like unopened.
No, there
collection.
I paid attention. Like every 5th or 6th one had the top popped off and had been drank or it had been opened. But he turns around and he sees what you are going to understand is Adam's middle way.
Mm-hmm.
Famous middle way religious work that he's going to take credit for. And then later on, we see John Paul III confessing to Guterres to being just the worst. He talks about being weak and vain.
And the greatest sin of all, being an undistinguished thespian.
Undistinguished thespian, a drug addict. And Guterres protests that, but your third way is a masterpiece. And he says, "'Tis true." Which,
the middle way?
Yeah. I love. Only John Malkovich can get away with just lazily throwing off a "'Tis true." But I didn't write it. My brother Adam did. And I took credit for it, which shocks Guterres. But then Guterres comes back with, I think this is the 3rd beautiful speech he's had this season about God's salvation, and it's a beautiful thing. I want to talk here about the contradiction between God and God's relationship with his believers and the believers' relationship with him. But before I do you have any comments on this? Because I'm gonna go deep in the Mosaic myth.
No, I really don't. It seems like it kind of stands on its own, or I read it at face value. I did kind of note that I think that Gutierrez has the resolve of a man who said no to the mini fridge in the last episode or the one before.
Oh,
When he was faced with the opportunity to
yeah,
drink.
yeah. He's still, maybe white knuckling it, but he's maintaining his strength there. So this is the standard Christian apologetics for like, why is the world a bad place, even though God loves us? And the fairly steelman argument for that is, well, God is not a micromanager, and God it has to be this way for God to give us our freedom. To give us like because otherwise we'd just be arguably automatons, if we just always did the perfect thing and did all the right things, and God kind of like kept us from getting into trouble, as it were. But what God does do is when we get in trouble is he saves us. There's literally like, salvation that's as anyone that puts faith in him can get it. And you get, no matter how shitty your life is, as long as you maintain that faith with him, that you'll have your eternal reward. And he says, God saves us with a kiss, just like with Moses. And I actually, my ears perked up at this because unlike the vast majority of Christians, I've read the Bible several times. And I'm like, I know how Moses died, and God did not kiss him to death. So what is going on here? So I did some research, and apparently this goes back to Deuteronomy 32.
Old
Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 5. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab as the Lord had said. And I have to give some context to this so this all makes sense. And, I don't care if you want to treat all this as myth, if you want to treat it as history. I tend to treat it like a lot of scholars do, and it's probably a tightly interwoven blend of both, opinion and myth and a little bit of history, and it gets repeated over time. But Moses had led, famously the Israelites out of Egypt and through their wanderings in the desert for 40 years. And he died while they were on the cusp of re-entering their promised land, their old homeland of Canaan. And they were wandering the desert as a punishment because 40 years hence, the Israelites balked at entering Canaan. Because people had moved there since the Israelites had moved to Egypt during a famine, which if you've seen Joseph the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, you're all up on that story. But they were subsequently enslaved there for many, many generations. And so the Lord delivered his people out of Egypt with the help of Moses' hand and led them promptly to Canaan. But when they went back there, they saw all these people who had moved in hundreds of years hence. And the Israelites, and the Bible makes it clear that this land is very good, so people would move in there. It's flowing with milk and honey, veritably. So the Israelites sent spies there, and they returned with reports with both the good things, like, oh man, look at the land gives so much fruits and vegetables, and it's flowing with milk and honey, but also there's these fearsome people that live there now. And the Israelites grew afraid because they didn't want to fight them. And God said, damn it, didn't I just humiliate this world power of Egypt and broke the Pharaoh's power, and now you're afraid of a few kind of swole shepherds dwelling in your land? You know what? Go wander the desert and think about what you did for a while. In fact, you know what? Wander the desert for 40 years until most of you people that were afraid are going to die off, and maybe I'll think about letting your children take the land. And that's what they did. For 40 years, Moses just led them around in the desert in this whole just giant holding pattern. And the Israelites constantly complained about things. The Israelites made a hobby of complaining about life in the desert. It's like, oh, there's no food. So God's like, fine, I'll give you food from heaven. It's manna. Oh, we're sick of this manna. We want meat. All right, I'm going to whip up a divine flock of birds. I hope you eat so much meat it comes out of your nose. Oh my God, there's poisonous snakes out here in the desert. We're getting bit and we're died. All right, I'm going to make this copper serpent. Moses sticking on a stick. Anyone gets bit by a goddamn serpent, look at this copper snake and you'll get instantly healed. And it just goes on and on. So 40 years of this, God's annoyed. Moses is annoyed. And the Israelites' latest complaint, again, just days before they were supposed to go into the land of Canaan, was, we're out of water. There's no water to drink. Oh my God, you brought us out of Egypt here to die of thirst in the desert. And Moses says, you know what? And he takes a staff, he smacks this rock, and water gushes forth like a torrent. And he's like, you people are the fucking worst. I've never seen a bunch of belly achers like you. I guess me and my brother have to once again cater to your whims. And then God says, You said what now? What's this me and my brother stuff? You didn't do shit. I'm the one that brought the water out of the rock, and you didn't give me enough credit there, Moses. And Moses is like, oh, you're right, Lord. I'm very sorry for speaking out of turn. And God's like, well, that's fine. But as punishment for this transgression, you don't get to go to the promised land.
Uh-oh.
Moses was anguished by this because this is something he's been looking forward to for 40-some years. And he begged the Lord to relent, and the Lord wouldn't budge. But finally, he's like, well, I guess you've been serving me faithfully your whole life. You were a prince of Egypt, and you stuck up for my people, and you got banished, and then you came back, and there's the whole plagues thing, and you've been serving me faithfully in leading my people and shepherding them through this desert. So here's the deal. Climb up to this really tall mountain, and there's this particular vantage place where you can see the entire promised land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Ocean. And that's your reward for doing all this work for me. And this glimpse is your reward, which brings us to Deuteronomy 34:5. Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab as the Lord had said. And apparently in the original Hebrew, the meaning of this verse is more like Moses died in Moab by the mouth of the Lord. And some Jewish and apparently Catholic traditions, they conceive this as, instead of being like the word or command of God, the mouth of the Lord is like a tender kiss that he gave to Moses. And then traditions build on that, and there's this whole apocrypha about Moses being assumed into heaven, which means you're taken into heaven body and soul. This process called assumption. The Catholic teaching says that like Mary was assumed into heaven, Jesus was assumed into heaven, just a couple other people like Enoch. And the relevant part of the story is that the Pope who first proclaimed back, I think in the 50s, the assumption of Mary as the official church doctrine, he got on the chair and he spoke from his authority and said, "This is fact," was Pius XII. And I think that is relevant to what's going to happen to Eric. Like what we're supposed to understand what happens to Eric. I think that Eric is going to be as assumed. He's got assumpted. I'm not sure how you conjugate that verb. It's the assumption. So you assumed. He's assumed into heaven.
Assumed into heaven.
Yeah.
I think so.
Because Lenny, of course, is Pius XIII. So, anyway,
that is fascinating.
But that's the thing. It's like what Guterres is this beautiful speech about God's forgiveness, and he tops it off with the kiss of God. But like a way to look at that is also God is a real peevish dick. He rewards a lifetime of faithful service with, well, you're not going to get the thing you want, but I'll let you glimpse it. And there's a couple other patterns like that with Moses. Like Moses wanted to see God like face to face, and God's like, "Hey, man, you can't handle it." But he relented to allow him to see a mere glimpse of his glory, and it almost killed Moses. But there's this, I just think it's interesting that he gives this very moving speech about God and his love and his forgiveness, but it all comes down to still, God's inscrutable. You can't understand what him and his motivations are, which is the beautiful and mysterious part of it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, thanks for my sermon on Moses, or for listening to it.
All of that is in Paolo Sorrentino's mind. I'd love to know what his upbringing was. Was it strictly Catholic? So he's got all this in mind?
I think I read it up that he's pretty raised Catholic, like I imagine a lot of people in Italy are. Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah. So that kind of closes out our Vatican business. Let's talk about the red-hooded idolaters.
Okay. So you were correct. Esther joined them at the end of last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And Esther and the red hoodie lady, who I do want to know more about. Like, I'll be fine if I never do, but I would love to know what drives her strong devotion.
Yeah. Like, why did she... I wonder, because I got to go back and watch season 1, because I wonder if she was a prominent person in the crowd at some of Lenny's sermons.
That's what I was thinking. And I also don't want to forget that she whispered something to JP3, and it didn't mean nothing.
Yes,
I know that for a fact.
That's true. Maybe she whispered the nature of what hell is.
Or that Lenny was definitely coming back.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know. But,
but-
there's no way she would say that with such conviction and now believe he's dead.
Yeah, but we see that they're shutting down the breathing operation because it stopped for some reason. The sighing stopped. We know why. But they're keeping this under. The one thing we forgot to mention is Bauer was contacted right after Lenny awoke, and we don't know who he's talking to, but he says, keep this just to the nurse or the nun and to the doctor.
Nobody knows besides me, the nun, the doctor, and whoever made the phone call.
Who made the phone call? Because the thing is I always thought that...
Did Lenny himself? That idea entered my mind at some point.
Because I always thought that Bauer was Voello's man. Like when the new Secretary of State or the Director of Creativity... God, I forget his name. Spalletta. When Spalletta said, everyone's afraid of Voello, but no one knows why. I thought, this Jack Bauer character is the reason why. He's the guy that's got the needles and the syringes and can do the dirty deeds.
I had this idea in the back of my mind from the very beginning. Not even the back of my mind. I said it as much in our podcast that he's working for someone else, but we don't know who.
I mean, but we know he personally reports to Voello, or Voello personally reports to him, maybe. But yeah, who is the person who made this call? I think that will be important, and because I don't think it's Ascente. I don't think it's.
But I mean, it could be anyone. It could be.
It has to be someone in Nevada, like not even
Nevada.
Nevada.
A janitor in the.
It has to be someone at the hospital in Venice. It can't be someone at the Vatican,
right.
unless the doctor calls. It can't be the doctor because he wouldn't refer to him in the third person. The doctor calls someone at the Vatican. And the Vatican calls someone or calls Bauer.
That now we've got like 5-6 people, and like
I don't know.
How do you buy those people's secrecy?
But we'll
open
see.
question.
But they're shutting down his breathing operation, and the Red Hood cult and Esther opine it's because they've killed the now Saint Lenny.
She feels it.
Yeah, and the Red Hood and Esther are very simpatico in this, and the red hooded lady says, let's go, because they've killed him. And Esther stands up and says she can feel it, which I wonder if they're setting these idolaters up to deny. I don't know, because so now they believe that Lenny died and was resurrected. That's pretty exclusive territory. That's like in the territory of like Jesus Christ, Mary, There's very few class of people who come back from the dead. Lazarus, I suppose. So he'd be a living saint. But also, could they see this as some kind of like trick or apostasy or something? I don't know.
But he definitely has, right? I mean, if we want to be really technical about it, a person who's had their heart taken out and replaced has experienced death.
That's true. Several times, yeah.
At least 3 times. He knows what heaven looks like. Either that's because God has told him, or he's been there to see it.
He's seen it during these trips back and forth,
right,
to and fro.
So they're right and wrong at the same time.
Yeah. So she suggests that we need to go and purify ourselves, and she says, if you believe me, follow me. And I don't know, about half, maybe a little bit less do. Esther's the first one. She doesn't hesitate. She takes her and her child. Although I wonder where the child's at, because he wasn't at the beach. But all the hooded idolaters, they are now no longer hooded. They're completely buck naked. All these different ages and sexes and states of bodies are standing on the shores of Venice in January. I looked it up. Average high in January, Venice, 45, low of 32, just above freezing.
Jeez Louise.
That Mediterranean is going to be ice fucking cold, and to a man and woman, nipples are rock hard in this scene. Like, this didn't seem like a comfortable scene to film at all.
No.
And they all silently head into the water. What do you think is happening here?
They are purifying themselves, and
unto death.
It's not without the realm of possibilities that they are killing themselves.
I mean, the music.
It's kind of like our Pope is dead, so we are sacrificing ourselves as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a possibility. I don't think as a Catholic that you would do that, because then you aren't getting into heaven.
Well, it's like, would you call like walking out into the ocean in the middle of winter, is that actually suicide? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure God knows your intent when you do it.
But what if their intent isn't to, like, their intent is to, meditate. I don't know. Like
I mean, what do you think is happening?
I think they're plunging themselves into River Jordan, so to speak. They are doing what they're saying. They are cleansing themselves. They're rebaptizing themselves. They're rededicating themselves to a cause.
Yeah, you're much more informed
But
about these biblical references than I am.
But
so.
I will say that the way it's filmed at like dawn with a very mournful music,
somber, yeah.
You could read it both ways, and I'm interested to see like what they do with this as we get into the meat. Haven't even gotten to the meat of the episode, which is Lenny / Saint Pius the 13th. So Lenny, I love Lenny. He's an amazing character, and I forgot how dickish and peevish he can be.
Yeah.
But he vacillates between, he wakes up and he smiles and he says to God, "You called me and I came back."
Yeah, he gets up, immediately drops to his knees to pray.
And it's very playful, but then he drops his voice like an octave and says, "Now tell me why." And he's like, he finds out he's been out for a year, and he's like, "Well, then I certainly deserve a diet Coke
cherry
Zero,
Coke Zero.
cherry Coke Zero." And he talks to Sister Pamela, who talks about her devotional watch over the Pope, but she leaves out a couple important details, how she was praying.
No, I don't think so. She was
No?
definitely watching him and praying.
Well, and I think Lenny probably knows the truth of the matter, and she refers to him as a holy father, and he kind of like dawns him. He's like, "Oh right, I'm the Pope," which is interesting. And he talks about the next thing we see that he's in with the doctor and the Madonna, because apparently that's where Bauer wanted them to be, shunted off to. So now 5 people do know: Bauer, the mysterious caller, the nun, the doctor,
Madonna.
and the Madonna,
And Eric.
But he's not going to tell nobody. And he's talking about, can't wait to wear his vestments again. They talk about what's wrong with his wife, and the doctor kind of explains, the situation where actually he doesn't explain it. Lenny intuits that they got pregnant, and the doctors warned them that there was some problems here, and they followed the word of God, and they followed life, and she gave birth to this profoundly ill child who has almost everything wrong physically and cognitively. He's never opened his eyes. He's never spoken a word. He is not able to move. It's actually somewhat unrealistic that the child has lived this long with, like, there's no feeding tubes.
Right.
There's no breathing machines. Like, he just lays in bed.
He's been kept alive by his mother's will alone.
Yeah, but then again, this is all, Sorrentino doesn't really give a shit about realism. He's trying to tell like an emotional religious truth here.
Right, that's fine. I mean, when we watch Game of Thrones, we don't have to say, just so you know, I don't believe in dragons.
Yeah. But I think some people, like, when it's set in the present day, like, they get hung up on that. Like, and I do too to some extent. Like, what bugs are real? What bugs are metaphor? What bugs, like, there's this whole, like, oh, what did it mean when the nun saw the cockroach on Lenny's hand? Was it stigmata? I don't think that meant any of those things. It's just something that he's doing. Maybe we'll understand later. But so he befriends the wife, and they bond over smoking. The doctor has to have a real crisis of faith here, because he's being confronted with a genuine miracle. The whole time Lenny's denying his miracle. We see him like in a cruciform pose on his bed, angrily talking to God that I did not ask for this, because he sees the Madonna starting to put pressure on him to perform a miracle. She's heard the Esther on the radio. She knows what he's capable of. She's heard the story of how he cured one of his friend's mothers of some terrible disease.
Yeah.
Why can't you do it now?
They're going to keep the secret of housing him here, then he has a moral obligation.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's for people like us who have difficult relationships with our mother.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to really put myself in the position of, and also a woman who hasn't given birth before, to put myself in the position of believing that a mother's love is so incredibly powerful that it can be so Madonna-like, it's just so pure and driven and so full of this unconditional love that keeps her in this place of agony.
I was gonna say it's a beautiful thing, but it's also a very destructive thing too.
Right.
The 2 lives are being lost in the preservation of this.
3, you could argue.
Yeah, because it's not like, Eric is not living in any kind of traditional sense that we would say.
So that, the mother has her son and the father has his wife, that they're all grieving each other.
Yeah, yeah. So there's the talk of him being a saint, because he says, I'm just a man, I'm just a pope. And she's like, no, you're not anymore. Because they're both being kind of dicks at this point. And she catches him up on the recent papal history and asserts that he's a saint and he's a Christ and the Messiah. And he says, I'm not a Messiah. If anything, I'm the Antichrist. And I'm like more like anti-pope. Am I right? So the whole time the doctor is asking him if, he's ready to, have his coming out party to Rome, which is weird because like, I don't know. I guess that from the doctor's standpoint, like Bauer can say what he wants, but he's got a living, he's got a miracle on his hands, and he does seem to be very devoted to God. And I don't think Bauer is going to be able to keep Lenny under wraps if it's up to the doctor.
Either God or he's really, really earning those fat sacks of money being the best cardiologist in the world.
Yeah. This guy, like, and I get it. Like, I guess nobody lives in Venice anymore.
Right.
It's so
a
crowded
cursed house. Nobody would have bought it. I'm sure that you got it for a steal.
But still, this is a fucking mansion. Like, old money. He's got a ballroom in it. Mansion.
Yeah.
And I get it. You're like the best cardiologist in the world, but like this guy's got to come from some like Sir John type money.
Right. Your father and your father's father and your father's father's
and he's
father had to be cardiologist.
Model and all this stuff. Yeah. So the doctor apologized for his wife for being so upfront, and he said, I want to meet your son. I'm not ready to go to Rome yet. And Lenny, in his first attempt to do something, just whispers intensely into Eric's ear. And Eric apparently hears and understands this, and a single tear of like joy falls from his eyes. And the Madonna then just looks right, like she comes and sees this and just looks right through us, through the camera.
Yeah.
And then he explains, Lenny, that what he said to Eric was he described heaven in perfect detail to him. And he also says, you and the doctor are going to go out, and you're going to leave Eric with me. And they do. They go out on a date, but it's winter in Venice, and apparently literally nothing is open. Everything's closed. But they talk about the old days and, how they met and what they thought of each other.
How they decided to get married, and
yeah.
And she walks for him again.
Yeah, and he sees her just like as she was, and it's a really beautiful moment.
So I believe that this, him telling her to trade the bathrobe for an evening dress and reminding her that her husband is afraid of losing her as well. And I think that this is him showing them the way of following the love in this moment. He's having them reconnect and rediscover each other so that they can find comfort in each other and move on from Eric passing on.
Yeah.
Or,
I thought it was a real kind of riddle speech because there's that to it, but like they don't exactly say that. The literal words they're saying about like man, if you start wearing a dress like that, then you might do this, and the man might kill himself. And like, wow. And
I mean, it became clear to me at the end of the episode that he was speaking this riddle speech, but it just felt clear to me in my interpretation, not that's how it is on the screen.
Yeah, and also like Lenny plays this like he's an intuitive man. Maybe he's got some foresight, maybe he's got some divine guidance, but it seems like what his actions are perfectly calibrated to get the result that he wants at the end. Although I don't know if that tracks because I don't think he wanted Eric to die here. But we also see like as a reprise from what we saw him do last year with Esther, or last season with Esther, where he gets on his knees and he does this intercessory prayer where he's like, Lord, it's time for you and I to talk about Eric, make him a man, and he demands him to make a man, but it doesn't work.
Right. And also there was another part here where the doctor says or confesses to Lenny that he's afraid that she's one more day away from losing her sanity.
Right.
So them going out to
And she does seem
reconnect
like,
with each
yeah,
other is a
yeah.
way to preserve her sanity too.
Yeah.
Because can you imagine her at her breaking point and then her son dies?
Mm-hmm.
That would push you over
Yeah.
in certain instances if you didn't have the Pope staying with you.
And he comes back, and you think that, like, oh man, maybe Eric's going to be sitting up in bed and he's going to be fine. But he says, I do not perform miracles. I just find myself at the center of coincidences. And I wonder if he even believes that.
I mean, I think that's the way that God's love is supposed to work in this show.
Mm-hmm.
That if you were to be so confident and arrogant to think that you could just perform a miracle whenever you wanted to, or that God loved you and you didn't have to work for it, that would be your undoing. I think that doubt and always trying to pray harder is what makes him successful.
Well, it's weird. It's because it's like almost like the extreme opposite of what Moses' sin that he committed with bringing forth the water for the Israelites. Whereas Moses' sin was striking the rock and saying, "Look what you made me do." Lenny's like strikes the rock and be like, "I didn't strike the rock. I didn't say God. I don't know. It just I happened to be here with my staff and it hit the rock and now there's water coming out. I don't know. This keeps happening to me. I don't know." It's like it's a weird denying of the divinity of an act both ways. One just says it's all on you, and one says it's just an accident. I don't, but again, there and again, Lenny does and says things because he has, like we wonder about, like, what did the red-hooded woman whisper in John Paul III's ear? What did Lenny whisper into Eric's ear? What is God whispering in Lenny's ear? We're not privy to the other side of these intense conversations that he's having.
Right, and it seems, I mean, he's very much in self-doubt. Like he's saying that I can't perform miracles, I can't fix your son, I'm not going to do it, but he still tries extra hard despite himself.
Yeah. So then the Eric is not healed, but the Madonna still gives Eric a bath, and it's identical, of course, to the Pieta statue, which is indeed damaged and fractured as this family itself is. And then Lenny goes in for round 2 with God, and this is where he goes all in. And there's this stuff he says. He goes, "Life is life, and I know I'm going where you'd rather I didn't." And I don't know exactly what that means, but then he goes into it, and I don't know why this is as emotionally powerful and moving as it is, but he just starts demanding of the Lord, "Make him a man, Lord, make him a man now."
No, I told you, do it now. Yeah,
and he's sitting there, and there's lots of examples of people doing this in the Bible. I know there's Lot, like, bartered with God over how many holy men could be in his city and God not destroy it, because God's like, "Hey, I'm going to destroy your hometown." And Lot's like, "Oh, geez, Lord. Whew. What if there's like 100 faithful people in here?" And God's like, "All right, I won't do it." Okay, God, okay. What if there's just 10 of us? And
Are you talking about Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And God's like, "Okay, fine. If there's 10 of you," and I think Lot pleads down to 5 or 2.
Just his family, right?
There's not, it's just his family, so God destroys the city. And there's also another prophet that's like, "Okay, you're talking to me, but maybe I'm just crazy, so perform this miracle for me," which I think was I'm gonna leave out, I'm gonna leave out a fleece, and I want it to be soaking wet with dew, have 5 gallons of water in the morning. And God does it, and then he's like, okay, well, it is due. Maybe that could just happen. So God, please don't get mad. But now I'm going to leave the same thing out, and I want it to be bone dry in the morning. And it's bone dry. But he's challenging God, and he's doing this in a very deliberate way. And then you see Eric raising his hand. And you're like, holy shit, what is going on here? But instead, it seems Eric dies. God is not going to make him a man, but he's going to free his parents, and maybe do something equally miraculous.
Right. He recognized his effort, all of their efforts, gave them the miracle that they needed, not the one they wanted. I feel like he gave that family the peace they needed to move on. He recognized their devotion over the last 11 years and her not terminating this dangerous pregnancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very powerful. I gasped. I did the whole Home Alone. I slapped in my face.
Yeah. It's wild. And then he says, "Okay, now this was the thing that I was sent here to do, and the time's come to return home. Call Gutierrez, and then meet me in the ballroom because I want to show you a miracle." And he holds their hands, and they close their eyes, and you see a vision of, I think you're supposed to understand, Eric ascending to heaven. Maybe even,
Yeah.
like I said, implying that he's assumed like this is like one of those miraculous things where he's taken body and soul into heaven, which would be, I don't know if this, like, a lot of Lenny's miracles are ambiguous, because there's a lot, as I've seen people speculate last year about, like, did he actually make Esther fertile, or did he sleep with Esther?
Oh.
I know, I can tell it's offensive even a thought of it, but like, if this kid is like, it turns out if he's assumed in heaven, there's no body, and like, what would that mean? Like, an earthly authority, these parents have been grieving for 11 years, and their child goes missing, and there's no body. Like, is that because this miracle didn't work out very well for Esther? It cost her husband. Her patron saint died. Like, not everything that happens to Lenny, or that happens when Lenny intercedes, is wholly beneficent. So I'm curious to see if they do go this assumption route. Like, this might get these parents into even more trouble.
Maybe.
But that's just assuming my crazy theory about Pope Pius XII and Pope Pius XIII is correct, and the assumption is correct, and all that. But
he shows them a miracle.
Yeah.
And I think the miracle is, actually I don't know what the miracle is.
Mm-hmm.
The peace they find when they hold hands and pray. You can see that all three of them are smiling in what seems like genuine, peaceful, not like happy, but just at peace types of smiles.
Yeah.
Which makes me think that it might be happy ending for them and not like a get arrested for a missing child thing.
Yeah, but again, we thought that Esther having a baby was going to be miraculous, and then
It still was.
and Lenny dropped the baby on the hospital bed, and then her husband left her, and she got kicked out of Rome, and she's been
I forgot they can go places like that.
Yeah. So I don't know, and I also want to say I haven't said anything about, because the nature is outlined, the music.
Holy shit,
This Come and See by Linier is the perfect choice, and like, there's the perfect choice of music throughout this episode.
This whole series has been great.
Oh my god, the soundtrack is amazing, and it's utterly perfect, and I love it. I love the show. I love the show. I love the show like I love The Leftovers, because it makes me, it gives me that spiritual connection to something that I don't normally feel, and I like it. I like it. That's one of the things I think secular folks need to think about, is how to, we've largely abandoned our sense of purpose and spirituality and community to the religious folk, and I think that's a mistake. I don't know how. I don't have an answer for it, but I think that's something we need, our generation and moving forward needs to think about, how we can satisfy those things that it seems that humanity needs or misses, especially the community aspect, in a secular fashion. So that's it. Eric ascends to heaven, and there's no dancing. It would be wildly inappropriate to have dancing, and instead we're treated to just the credits so we can meditate on what we've just seen. Hell of an episode. So much fun to start off with. So much sexy. So badass, and then so moving and powerful and profound at the end.
Yeah, I'm prematurely mourning the fact that there's only 2 episodes left.
Yep.
And there's a possibility that's all we'll ever get, but at this rate, I hope not.
I will never need it.
I'm also bummed out that it's going to be another 4 episodes or 4 years before we get more.
I'll never need or want another episode of these Pope series.
Yeah.
But if Sorrentino comes back and has one that he thinks is worthy of release, I will absolutely watch it.
I'm fucking there.
I
didn't expect this season even come at all.
Yeah. So we're hoping that you'll be there for us next week too, when we just talk about the penultimate episode. Just 2 episodes left. Thanks for listening to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Until then, I'm A.Ron.
And I'm Cecily.
See ya.